ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
A whole bunch of news related to the criminal justice system. We have 4 television sets on 4 different channels. Each one is on a different story related to the criminal justice system. And who better to turn to when analyzing the criminal justice system than someone who's not just a garden variety legal analyst, but he's also a criminal. Yes, that's right. I am very, very pleased to welcome back to the program former attorney, former convict, and legal commentator whose most recent conviction was vacated, Domenick Crispino. Dom, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for coming in again.
Good early morning.
Indeed it is. All right. Let us begin with the situation involving President Trump. I think a lot of folks realized that the case that the special counsel Jack Smith was bringing against him, that once Trump got elected, that was not going to go anywhere. Yesterday, the judge drops these charges at the request of the special prosecutor Jack Smith, who I maintain looks exactly like Coach Beard from Ted Lasso. He says that he's quitting, he's folding up shop, which makes sense because Trump indicated that he was going to be firing him anyway. Obviously, there's nothing typical about this case, but how unusual is it for a special prosecutor to drop charges in a high-profile case like this? What are the legal and the political calculations behind a decision like this?
Well, I mean, this is obviously all political. I mean, there's arguments to be made that the prosecution itself was political, although I've said before and on the show that I thought this was the strongest case of all the cases brought against Trump. And if he had not won the election and faced trial, he stood a very, very good chance of dying in prison.
They said, I think Jack Smith said in his filing that the equation had changed for him because Trump was now going to be president, and the longstanding guidance going back over 50 years from the Department of Justice is you can't prosecute a sitting president. So, is that what this is all about here?
Yeah, yes, it is. It is. I mean, it's kind of unseemly to have a president in office and on trial at the same time. I mean, they could have tried to defer it, but once he loses his authority, and certainly Trump will remove him from his authority on a first chance, there is no case anymore. So as a practical matter, he's just getting ahead of the game. You know,
I asked my wife to look into this because she works for a government watchdog group that audits government spending. I said I'd be really curious to know how much was spent on these federal investigations into Donald Trump, which are now going nowhere and have gone on for quite a while. Do you have any idea? I know it's just speculation on your part, but ballpark, do you have any idea how much this sort of investigation from the special counsel costs? You got to pay his salary, all his investigators, everything else. How much does something like this cost the taxpayers?
It's a lot of money. I mean, it's not billions, but
are we talking 10 million, 20 million, 30 million?
Yeah, easily. I mean, I don't remember the exact numbers. When Ken Starr was the special prosecutor for Whitewater in the late 90s, I mean, they brought a fair amount of cases. I want to say the number 100 million
really
was bandied about.
I mean, it just seems so easily avoidable, even given what you said, that these might be the most serious transgressions that he was charged with.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think the dropping of these charges doesn't reflect a strength of the Trump legal defense in your view? It's mostly just the political realities.
Of course. I mean, he quit before he can be fired.
Yeah. Having been on the other side of the legal system, what do you think the decision says about prosecutorial discretion and fairness in high-profile cases?
Well, it's everything in a high-profile case. Whether the power to indict is the power to destroy. So any indictment can destroy someone. Trump, I mean, is against all odds, has survived it, but he had to win the presidency back. Mm-hmm. It was like all or nothing for him. So if he loses that election, I think it's assured that he would have spent the rest of his life in prison. I mean, he's what, 77, 78?
Right, but with that in mind, the fact that everybody knew that he was a popular political figure, very likely to be nominated, and at least a 50-50 chance of winning the presidency, isn't this the perfect example of prosecutorial discretion, just like another special counsel, Robert Hur, used with President Biden? I'm sure he could have brought a case on classified documents with President Biden. Special counsel chose not to. It seems like such an odd choice for Jack Smith to use that discretion to bring not one but two cases against Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I never can quite figure out why he split them. I think he was going to bring everything down in Florida, but then he got a bad call on the judge, and I think he retreated on the second part and went up to Washington D.C. and got a good call on the judge.
Obviously, most criminal defendants, you other people listening, we have a lot of people listening in prison right now. They're not in the same position as a Donald Trump, not in terms of notoriety, not in terms of resources, not in terms of supporters. But is there any lesson that the people listening to us right now in prison, or people that may be criminal defendants in the future, is there any lesson that regular people can learn, those without the resources and the public profile of someone like Trump? Is there any lesson to be learned from cases like this?
Well, I mean, you could probably draw some very general lessons. I don't think anything specific. I mean, yeah. Oh well, you know, the real nugget is get elected president. You're okay.
There you go.
But I don't think that's very likely from prison. Although there was that guy who
right, Lyndon LaRouche or Eugene V. Debs.
No, but when Obama was running for re-election in 2012, the inmate who filed for the West Virginia presidential primary won 40%.
That's right.
I mean, if he had just been wiser to get into all 50 states, he might have gotten himself out. But I think the general lesson is that you don't know what's going to happen, and if unless you're dead to rights and you can cut a good deal, or you're unflailingly innocent. I mean, and that does happen. You might want to feel the case out. I mean, the cases have pressure points. They have cracks in them, like cracks in the concrete.
Now, when you say that, though, unflailingly innocent, so much of the discussion about the Michael Flynn situation, the Hillary Clinton email situation, what we just witnessed with Donald Trump, Joe Biden, so much of what we heard from their defenders comes down to mens rea or criminal intent. So I know this may seem weird to people that haven't been through the system, but isn't innocence a little bit of a gray area because it's not always clear if you have criminal intent?
It's the grayest of areas because innocence is not really a part of the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. The choices are two, guilty or not guilty. And in certain cases, not guilty by reason of insanity, but we won't go there. We're not going to plead insanity here. It's guilty or not guilty. It's not. It's a matter of whether or not they make their case based upon what the statute is and how the proof jives with that. It's not a matter of you being an innocent person. You almost don't know what an innocent person is. I mean, in the broader sense, we do, but in the criminal justice system, it really has no place.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. By the way, if people have questions about any of these legal cases that we're talking about, you can give Dom Crispino a call at 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. All right, what becomes of the other Trump prosecutions? He was convicted in this Manhattan case involving Alvin Bragg. Looks like the judge in that case, Juan Merchan, has sort of postponed indefinitely any sentencing in that case. What becomes of that case in your view, and what becomes of Fani Willis and the Georgia case?
Well, the Manhattan case is interesting because technically in New York, you're supposed to proceed a case to sentencing promptly. The very delay in sentencing may just destroy the case, and ultimately, even if they just keep kicking it down the road. I'm not sure what Merchan is doing here. He might be making a decision on the motion to dismiss, and might end it right there. It looks like he doesn't want to sentence him. and that can't be. Something's got to give here. You can't just keep that case in limbo.
So what's the timeline now in terms of next steps with that whole thing?
Well, it's they adjourned it without date, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll let everybody know.
I mean, it seems like there should be something a bit more precise.
You would think.
All right, 646-720-0635. Quickly on Georgia, what do you think?
On Georgia's not going anywhere either. I think the Georgia Court of Appeals probably will punt this one down the wayside, and it'll just disappear.
Finally, on the Trump legal cases, one that he seemed to be particularly bothered by, and I understand because he spent his whole life building a business in New York State, was this Letitia James case involving, civil forfeiture and fraud and things like that. I'm still not sure that I understand what the crime necessarily was, but clearly they won a pretty big money verdict, maybe one of the biggest civil verdicts in history. Where does that go?
Well, it's in front of the appellate division right now. They had argument on it. We're probably going to get a decision as early as the end of this year. Although I'm sure the appellate division is proceeding cautiously, is going to write a really good opinion on it. The likely outcome, they didn't prove their case. It's one thing to say you have bad practices as a business, but when you bring the word fraud into the equation, fraud has a meaning in the law. It's not the general meaning of fraud. Fraud means that you've done something that induces people wrongly to do something. Who was induced here?
Right.
Who did something wrong?
Well, that's why I found the initial verdict so perplexing. And to me, not that I was watching the hearings every day, but I was reading the articles about it. It seemed to be a verdict that was way out of line.
Yeah, I mean, the judge granted summary judgment on it, which meant in the civil case, he weighed the evidence that was put before him on written motions, sworn statements and documentary evidence, and found that the prosecutor proved the civil case not beyond a reasonable doubt by a preponderance of the evidence, which is like 50% plus.
Yeah, I like that one, a preponderance of the evidence.
It's really a fair preponderance of the evidence if you want to be fair.
All right, we're going to continue with Dom Crispino in a moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 open lines. If you have a question, 1-646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead. My guest in studio is the one and only Dom Crispino, ex-lawyer and ex-con, and he is breaking down some of the legal cases du jour, and boy, oh boy, are there plenty. We're going to get to your calls in a moment at 646-720-0635. Let's talk about the Daniel Penny case. That trial looks to be wrapping up. This case has been very polarizing. Legally, how challenging is it to argue self-defense in a situation like this, especially when there's video evidence?
It is very challenging. It's a tough case, and I see it as a tougher case than many in the media see. I think they're leading with their heart and not their minds. New York is a tough state with regard to justification, which is the defense of yourself or others. In this situation, it was Penny defending others by immobilizing
Jordan Neely.
Jordan Neely, yes.
Right. Do you think that where the trial is, it being Manhattan, how much of a factor is public opinion, particularly in New York City? What sort of a role does that play in the trial's outcome?
Well, public opinion plays a role in a lot of well-known trials and well-covered trials. Those jurors have to see what's going on. I mean, they're not supposed to, but they are, and they've heard about the case before. So there's got to be a lot of pressure on them to sift this out. The way I see it right now, as I would call this case, I would call it a conviction on the lower count.
And what's the lower count?
Criminally negligent homicide.
And then what sort of prison sentence does that call for?
A maximum. It would be a maximum of 1 1/3 to 4 years. It could be probation. It could be conditional discharge. It could be a fine.
What role do you see race playing in a case like this, both in the courtroom and in the court of public opinion?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's a polarizing case. You have white defendant, African American victim. So yeah, and it's played out that way, although probably not as heavy in the media right now. I think the local media has played it pretty straight with that. Sometimes they'll go heavy on the protests, showing that. There are protests out there every day.
I'm sure. Yeah.
You don't really see it.
I know you've run for office before. Having been a candidate for office, how would you assess the political responses to this case? Are politicians exploiting this situation for their own agenda, or are activists doing that same thing?
Always here. I mean, that the most of your politicians in Manhattan you could say they're fairly liberal for the most part. There are no conservatives in Manhattan. And there are very few moderates in Manhattan, and it would seem to me that they would probably be on the side of the protesters in this situation, seeking to have Daniel Penny,
Yeah, they want to run him out of town on a rail. I mean,
they want
tar and feather.
And run him upstate.
Yeah. By the way, Pete has a question about this particular case. Pete, you're on with Dom Crispino. Hi.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Dom. Yeah, my question to you, especially that you've been on both sides of the fence, is: can President Trump, does he have the authority to, or if this gentleman gets convicted, this soldier, this hero to me, could he overturn it? Could he give him a pardon?
No, it's a state case. President Trump will have the ability to pardon people in the federal system, but the only person who can pardon Daniel Penny, if he were to be convicted, is Governor Kathy Hochul.
Oh boy, that's not too much of a chance. All right, thank you
Pete, thank you, appreciate that. So your prediction on the case is a conviction on this lower count?
Yes. I mean, the higher count requires some sort of higher mens rea, an intent that he knew there was a risk and he intentionally disregarded the risk. I mean, that sounds like contradictory, but it's not. And the lower count is more of a negligence count where you disregarded the risk, but you might not. Maybe there's no proof you knew about the risk.
In terms of another story that it really offended the sensibilities of a lot of folks, is the whole Jussie Smollett hoax. Obviously, this was another high-profile case because, to start, it was a famous person. Secondly, it was a very political crime, given what he claimed about the nature of it. And then it got a lot of attention because it was a hoax. This guy seemed guilty as sin. Last week, the Illinois Supreme Court vacated his conviction. How does that happen?
Well, it was very simple. They had struck a little deal with the Cook County prosecutor, who was a very liberal prosecutor who was elected, and she gave him the deal of the century, which was a plea, and he did some community service, and yet it was a minor little touch up. And there was a big backlash against this, and they ended up appointing a special prosecutor, Dan Webb. Dan Webb is famous because he was the big prosecutor of Chicago corruption. So they pulled him out of a law firm for this. That's how important it was, and gave him a staff and a budget, and they convicted him of a felony. And his argument was, not Dan Webb, the Jussie Smollett's attorney's argument was that, hey, wait a minute, we already did this. This is like double jeopardy.
It's covered by the plea.
Right, it's covered by the plea. You can't try me again. And the Illinois Supreme Court agreed.
Well, I mean, based on the way you explained that, it seems like that was probably the right decision from the court's perspective.
It seems so. And curiously enough, they cited the Bill Cosby case. And the similarity to Cosby's case is that Cosby was facing potential criminal charges in a case, and also there was a parallel civil suit brought by the victim, and he was going to invoke the Fifth Amendment in the civil suit and not answer questions, and the victim's attorney really wanted him to answer questions, so a deal was struck with the prosecutor saying they were not going to prosecute him. It's called a nolle prosequi. That's the Latin, that we will not prosecute you. So then he he didn't have to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. And then a new prosecutor was elected and said, "Oh no, we're going to
disregarding the deal that office
That's
had made."
correct. And they convicted him, and he spent 3 years in prison. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court threw that out and said, "Hey, this is really unfair."
At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Dom Crispino. So this is a done deal in terms of Smollett. He's not going to, there's no higher authority that they can appeal to as far as that conviction goes.
No, I mean, I guess if the Illinois Supreme Court had relied on federal law exclusively, the U.S. Supreme Court, they could petition, the prosecutors could petition for writ of certiorari, but this is based on state law, so it's going to end here.
When you have celebrities, I think there's always going to be people when a case goes a certain way, namely in their direction, whether you mentioned Bill Cosby getting his conviction tossed. Obviously, the example of Robert Blake and O.J. Simpson is notorious. There's going to be people that say Jussie Smollett got preferential treatment because he's a celebrity and maybe his politics jive a little bit more with where Cook County is, where we're heard right now on WGN. What's your take on both of those things? Did the political aspect of this play a role, and did the celebrity factor play a role?
Oh, of course. The prosecutor, the woman, I forget her name.
Is it still Kim Foxx, or is it someone else?
I think it was Kim Foxx, and she obviously was sympathetic to him, and politically was sympathetic. I mean, they're both African American, and Chicago has a big African American community, and there's this tension with the police there as well, and he's well known. So yeah, I mean, she worked out a deal where there was like a little slap on the wrist, but it was it was a penalty, and he was called out for it. He had to do a little mea culpa on that. So for her, that was enough.
And so what ultimately was his penalty?
I think he did some community service or something like that.
No, but so he got a no jail sentence.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Clorox Sentiva smells like lavender. Cleans like Clorox. And feels like...
All right, that could go on for a while. Experience the long-lasting freshness of Clorox Sentiva. Available in Clorox Sentiva Lavender Scented Bleach. Use as directed.
Home means something different to everyone. But with Rocket Mortgage, home can mean even more. It can mean a college education, taming your high-interest debt, even a renovation. We've made it easier than ever to use your home equity. That home you worked so hard for, now it can work hard for you. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC, licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org, number 3030.
Experience a progressive lens engineered with AI from Essilor, powered by individual measurements of your visual behavior. A lens personalized to you by an Essilor expert. Discover Verilux XR Track and enjoy instantly sharp vision in motion and seamless transitions from near to far. Find your local Essilor expert today at Essilor.com.
So do you think that that's a fair penalty for what Smollett did in terms of the wasting of police resources and things of that nature?
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, it definitely seems like he got a sweetheart deal. I don't blame people for being pretty ticked off at this. So.
But when they pulled Dan Webb off the shelf for that one, you knew they were coming for him.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like this is an example of the Illinois Supreme Court maybe making the correct legal decision, but at least from where it stands, from my perspective, making the incorrect ethical and moral one. But,
yeah, well, ethics and the law are not exactly the same thing.
All right, let's talk about Sean P. Diddy Combs. With all the allegations against Diddy, what challenges let's look at it from the prosecutorial perspective first, what challenges do prosecutors face when dealing with a high-profile celebrity accused of major crimes like this?
Well, I mean, he brings tremendous financial resources, so the playing field is level. Against most defendants, the playing field is tilted towards the prosecutor because they have investigators, they got a budget, they're the ones bringing the charge. You routinely will judge shop. If in a jurisdiction you can have more than one spot, they can forum shop. For example, Diddy's case was brought in the Southern District. But, I mean, you know that things could have happened in the Eastern District or whatnot. So you can shop that as prosecutors, and you bring the case where you want. I mean, for example, in cases that I was involved with personally, where I was the defendant, there were clearly shopping going on. They would wait till a certain judge was the grand jury judge, and then the grand jury judge is the one who supervises the grand jury. He's not in the room, but he's available for whatever is necessary when they bring an indictment. Now that judge will preside, so they kind of they forum shop. That office in Manhattan is famous for that, by the way. But Diddy's in the feds, so I digressed.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. This is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Dom Crispino. So every day I feel like I see a different article about someone filing a civil case against Diddy, trying to get a civil judgment in addition to whatever criminal penalty he's potentially looking at. How do all these civil cases affect the criminal case?
Well, I don't know if they affect, but what they're doing is they're waiting to benefit from the criminal case. A criminal conviction, especially if it's on facts and based on testimony and other evidence that also would support the civil verdict, can make the civil verdict very easy. So these plaintiffs or victims would come in and take a share of Diddy's wealth.
Mm-hmm. How would you handicap this case at this point?
It doesn't look good for him.
No,
not at all. They've been lying in wait for him for a while, and the feds will wait. The state court, state prosecutors, they just jump in, kind of willy nilly sometimes. But the feds will wait you out. They'll build a case. Even when they could have brought it a year ago, they'll wait it out and really cross their T's and dot their I's.
So, what's Diddy's best defense here?
That's a tough one. I mean, you have multiple witnesses to multiple crimes. And as I understand it, the prosecutors are accusing him of using coded messages to family members to try to lean on witnesses and intimidate them. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, prosecutors will, it seems like they always say that kind of thing, but it seems like there's not like it's not like a one witness case or a two witness case. It's going to have a breadth of witnesses here. And I don't know if they could all be unbelievable in this kind of situation.
Well, can he just say, take the approach that all this stuff, all this sexual stuff was all consensual? We didn't force anybody to do anything?
Well, yes, he's going to say that. But of course, these people who are victims are going to say no. But the one problem the victims have in the case is that, why didn't you speak up earlier? Mm-hmm. That's always the problem in that kind of case. Why didn't you speak up earlier? Why didn't you come see someone? Why didn't you go to the authorities? Who did you tell? Who didn't you tell? But that has to be answered by the prosecutors, and they know that already, and they're ready for that. They're going to say that people were intimidated, or they were drugged, or coerced, or whatever occurred.
I think it's such a shame that they don't allow cameras in the courtroom in the federal system. And I think there's so much interest in a case like this one. Everyone would want to watch it. And it's just, to me, absurd that we don't get to enjoy watching this case, other high-profile cases like El Chapo, that there's a lot of public interest in. When it comes to high-profile cases like Combs or any of the other ones that I mentioned or that you mentioned, Bill Cosby, O.J. Simpson, and so on, Michael Jackson, does the fact that it's a high-profile defendant, in your opinion, help or hurt the pursuit of justice? Are they more likely to get it right because the world is watching, even with no cameras in there? Or are they more likely to be, I don't know, overzealous or do certain things to mug for the cameras than if it was just anybody else?
Well, that was the O.J. Simpson problem. Mm-hmm. People were saying that the prosecutors were playing to the media and not really tending to the case. I remember watching a fair amount of that trial. I was practicing at the time. And my prediction at the time was that he was going to be acquitted. I was actually interviewed by WPIX leaving a hearing, and a reporter was there, and I was on the news that night saying he's going to be acquitted, and he was. But, I mean, you know, I'm not Nostradamus or anything, but just from watching it, I got that vibe. Yeah, they might change things. They might go a little bit over the top. But I'm a firm advocate in cameras in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. I think we have to shed a light on all these proceedings. I think a lot of stuff is down and dirty. If it's not, if you know that people aren't watching, all we get out here is the press accounts, and the press accounts are really deficient. I'll tell you. Just going back to Daniel Penny for a moment.
Right.
I had a question popped in my head that I hadn't thought of earlier when I was just prepping for just to come here tonight.
Right.
When did the victim die? He died in the hospital, apparently. It was unclear on the video whether he died on the spot, whether he died a little bit later. And it turns out you have to read a number of press accounts to find out that he had a faint pulse when the police came, and the police didn't come immediately. It was like, you know, a couple of minutes at least. So he was alive. So he passes away between the time the police get there and when he's pronounced dead at the hospital. And the reason why that's important now is that his attorneys are raising the defense hey, he didn't die of the
chokehold,
the compression. Yeah, I call it the compression. But he died because he had sickle cell and blah blah blah, whatever it was, whatever the expert testified to. The $90,000 expert. You had to dig for that fact, and that is really one of the center points of the defense. And that's why I think he's going to be convicted on count one. I don't think that theory flies.
Why wouldn't, just going back to Penny, why wouldn't Penny take the stand in this case? I mean, based on what you're describing, especially before a Manhattan jury, it doesn't seem like at this point it's a slam dunk for him. I would think that the best opportunity that he has is to go before the jury and explain why he did what he did.
Yes, I mean, to humanize it. What his attorney said was that he gave a lengthy statement to the police, which was played for the jury, which explained everything, and they believed that was sufficient. Of course, he could be the world's worst witness, and they don't want to subject him to cross-examination, so they're willing to live with that statement. But that statement doesn't humanize him. You see, if he got up in front of the jury and looked them in the eye, showed a little emotion, and answered some personal questions about his background, aside from the ones I already put in through tangential witnesses at the beginning of the case in terms of his reputation, they put in reputation evidence.
Do we know if he testified before the grand jury?
The press accounts don't say. I don't think he did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he did, because then they could have actually used that as evidence, as admissions, under the admissions exceptions to the hearsay rule, to put it in.
I always hear lawyers cautioning their clients about testifying, and I'm sure that's good advice. But having been a grand juror, I can tell you in the cases where the person that was being charged with a crime came and testified before us and gave their side of the story, those people that at least put forward a decent impression, they were the only people that didn't get indicted of everything, because in our case, in our situation, we were just hearing, doom and gloom cases, of all these incredibly guilty people again and again. And to have someone that you can empathize with, that seems like a normal human being, giving his or her side of the story, it really did feel like an oasis in the desert. And I always tell my wife, for instance, if she ever gets arrested, she should testify before the grand jury because she makes a good impression.
I hope she doesn't.
Same here.
No, but I agree with you. Attorneys do not want their clients to testify in front of the grand jury. Matter of fact, like the Legal Aid Society has like a blanket thing.
Right.
They don't.
I know that.
And the courts have backed them up sometimes from even the clients want to testify. They'll yank it out, and the courts have said that they can do that because it's not a trial. See, at trial, the defendant decides whether he or she is going to testify. And the defendant says they're going to testify, the attorney cannot stop them. But in terms of grand jury, it's not a critical stage in that regard. Listen, if you've got a self-defense case, testify. Because if you have justification.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I don't know what the grand jury looked like in terms of Daniel Penny's perspective, but in this case, if I was Daniel Penny, I would absolutely be testifying.
Yeah, think about it.
It's not like he has this lengthy criminal history that would be allowed to be admitted if he testifies, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
he's
correct.
stellar. There's got to be some reason. Maybe as you said, maybe it's because he's not a good witness. I would have thought for sure he was going to testify and give his perspective on what happened. By the way, all the people we're talking about, most recently Daniel Penny and P. Diddy, they're going to be very high-profile inmates. Diddy is currently incarcerated, and obviously if Daniel Penny gets prison time, he'll be incarcerated. What is prison like for someone like a Daniel Penny or a P. Diddy?
Well, I could speak to what goes on in the state system. The state system.
You served in the state system.
Yes. Unfortunately, twice.
Mm-hmm. You're the Grover Cleveland of lawyer felons.
That's correct.
Yes.
In, out, in. And now to Donald Trump.
Exactly.
He's going to be
exactly right
all over again. If you're, I mean, there's high profile and there's, forget my case was in the papers, but I wasn't deemed high profile, although I was essentially monitored case upstate. That is, anything that any transfer for me had to go through an extra stage. They do that kind of stuff. But in terms of a high profile case where there could be some risk to the inmate, they call them incarcerated persons, by the way.
Yeah,
but I call them prisoners because that's what you are. You're a prisoner. You're in prison. They have a unit called APPU up in Clinton Correctional Facility where there are high-profile cases, cops and whatnot. And I think there are several other units in the state that are smaller, like where Harvey Weinstein was, which was a medical facility out in Wendy, in the western part of the state, where there's additional protections. You don't mix with the general population. And that's a good thing and a bad thing because, you have crazy people also in APPU.
Oh, no doubt about it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So both of these guys would probably get in the federal system. I know it's a little different, but something like that.
Maybe. I mean, Daniel Penny may go into population, although it probably would be he'd probably go to a medium security in New York State. You'd have to have a minimum 7 to get to a max. So you could probably go to a medium, a safe medium, probably like in Wallkill or Otisville or or even a max like Eastern. That's closely controlled.
Dom Crispino is here. We'll take a couple of your calls at 646-720-0635. Michael is calling from WGN in Chicago. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Michael. Hi, Dom. I love your show, Joe. I just discovered you a few weeks ago, and gosh, it's so good, Joe. You're so refreshing. Thank you.
Yes, on behalf of Joe's everywhere, I thank you for that, Michael.
And your son Carmen is just the cutest. I'm sure he just takes after his mom.
Know Carmine's name?
No, I'm only joking. But I just love your show and the family aspect of it.
I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. And what I wanted to ask Dom was, it's about presidential pardons. I had a case where when I was living in France, I bought some documents, historical documents, and I sold them back in New York. And I kind of did it to make a little bit of a living. And eventually I bought a piece and I put it up for sale at Sotheby's in New York in 2001. And the French government said I stole it. Ooh. And they said it was theirs with no proof. And I had a receipt from a store I bought the document in Lyon, France, and when I came back to America, I filed it as not customs, but as a historical treasure, I think. So I did everything correctly. It wasn't stolen. And when my attorney in New York dealt with Nicole LaBarbera, who is the U.S. attorney at the time, he asked for the proof. How is this stolen from my client? And she said, France's demand for this back is good enough for me. Isn't that terrible?
Well, yeah. So, Michael, how was your case adjudicated?
I was made a felon. I was given 1 month of house arrest, a $5,000 fine, and 2 years of probation, and that was it.
Did you plead guilty?
Yes, I did.
Well, I mean, any reaction to that, Dom? I mean,
well, innocent people plead guilty all the time.
No, I know
It's a matter of convenience.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know enough about the law of antiquities or that kind of stuff, and nor do I know how France defines that. That would all be those would all be factors in whether or not a case should have been brought or not.
I'm sorry you went through that, Michael.
Oh, thank you, Joe. What I wondered was...
It is frank,
I thought
Michael.
about writing a letter to President Trump and asking him if he could look into it, because there were, I think maybe his name was William Safire at the New York Times. He wrote some articles about it, because when the property was taken from Sotheby's, it sat at the FBI office for 2 years before they even took it to court. And so my lawyer, said, what's going on here? And William Raspberry wrote some articles about it. It was really a very interesting case, and I pleaded guilty just to get out of it. It cost me so much money. And, it was just terrible.
Well, I'm sorry you went through that, Michael, because that sounds stressful, and it sounds like you were certainly not treated well at all. And the fact that they would just take the French government's word for this is just absurd. But when when you write to President Trump, right, so far you've called me Joe 6 times, and you called William Safire William Raspberry. Just make sure you write to the right guy. Don't call him Ronald Trump or something. Just make sure it gets to the right address. Thank you, Michael.
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Exactly. But it's got to get the right name. I mean, Trump would be irked if he got a letter to Ronald Trump or something. In terms of your experience, Dom, how do you think media coverage affects the fairness of trials? There are so few trials these days at all, because it seems like, listening to Michael's case reminded me, almost everything ends up in a plea. I know you went to trial, but we know so many criminal defendants and so many criminal defense lawyers where basically it's plea. How does the media coverage help or hurt defendants and prosecutors when cases actually go to trial?
Well, the media will essentially mimic what the press release says and what the press conference says. So they give the prosecution's view, and then they'll end up a story with and attempts to contact the defendant or defendant's attorney not responded to. Mm-hmm. That's kind of an imbalance right there. So yeah, it's the prosecutors bring the case, and then they bring it to the media and buttress their case, and they poison the jury pool. In one of my cases, in questioning a juror, one guy said, "Yeah, I read about that case. They had him tried and convicted, in that article."
Oh, jeez, that is.
Of course, that guy didn't get to serve.
Of course. Dom Crispino, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you very much, my friend.
All right.
We'll do this again soon. All right. 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.